This podcast was brought to you by Patience, a quality I thoroughly recommend, because if I had waited a week or two before recording this podcast, me and Sven would have both seen the new Star Wars film and reviewed it. But now we'll have to wait till next month. But we've got some good stuff in the meantime. Hello and welcome to Monkey Broadcast, our monthly review and discussion show with me, the Jonin Monkey.
And me, Sven the Crusader.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to 2016, which will probably be the same as any other year.
Yeah, hopefully, we do things like right and such, and hopefully there are good games. Basically the usual.
Yeah, and hopefully there won't be quite as many depressing celebrity deaths as there were last year.
Oh god, early this year was brutal. Also, hopefully this year's elections in both of our cases do not end in disaster.
Yeah.
Moving very quickly on from that potential source of cataclysmic depression.
Yep, we'll head straight into our first section.
Q&A!
This is the section where we answer questions from the audience. If you'd like us to answer your questions, either leave them in the comments or send them to me via Twitter with the hashtag MBQuestion.
Our first question comes from Train Man. What are some television cartoons from the 80s and 90s that you used to love watching as a kid, if any,
That you feel haven't been getting enough attention in modern times?
Well, there's two I can mention off the top of my head. First off, there was a series called Visionaries. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one.
I definitely have not.
Okay, yeah, Visionaries, it was... I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it, especially since I'm working off of memory here. Like everything, it was a vehicle to sell toys. It was kind of a more of a fantastical setting in that it was, quote, a time when magic is more powerful than science, unquote. And it basically consisted of two warring tribes of magical knights. It was the Spectral Knights and... I forget the name of the dark side. It's something like Darkling Lords or something like that. But yeah, all I remember is that they were led by a man named Darkstorm. Which, yeah, in fairness, you couldn't help but be an evil villain with a name like that.
Yeah, that's pretty much the summary of villains in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, pretty much. But, like I said, I can't remember how good the storytelling was, but it was one of those things where the design of everything looked really cool, and it was high-concept fantasy, which even as a kid appealed to me. But also, one of the cool things about it is that the characters all had two different abilities. One was that they could transform into animals through this... on the action figures, it was using holographic stickers because those were all the rage back then. But they could transform into one specific animal with those forms. And by forms, I mean chest symbols. Seriously, listen to what you're saying past me. The other was... they had these stars which could summon different powers, like one was the power of decay on the villain side, the other one was the power of speed, but as part of their mythology, in order to activate this power, they would have to perform these, like, mystical spells. Like, they were basically short rhymes that the characters would say once per episode, which you could remember and then recite yourselves when you're playing. Yeah, there was one called the Power of Wisdom, which was something like... whispered secrets of a shattered age, I summon thee, renew this age, something like that. It was that kind of thing that appealed to me as a kid. Although, admittedly, some of the powers were more useful than others. Like, the Power of Wisdom was basically, give me a useless cryptic comment which we'll only realise the true meaning of at the end of the episode.
Oh, again, another hallmark of 80s and 90s cartoons, fake storytelling.
Yeah, when you're considering that, again, some had the power of super speed, and one had the power of destruction, which is basically summon a massive Goliath to destroy things. But yeah, it was an enjoyable series, and I'd like to see get back. I've got a couple of others, but do you want to get an edgeways in first, or?
No, because admittedly... I watched cartoons as a kid, but I only ever discovered Cartoon Network at the age of 7. And otherwise spent all my time plastered to my computer screen.
Fair enough.
And furthermore, all the shows that I watched, I think people pretty much give all the accolades they deserve nowadays. I'm talking, Dexter's Lab, Ed, Edd n Eddy, kinda, sorta, technically watch Dragon Ball Z. Kind of.
Yeah. Okay, there were two more I could mention very quickly then. One of them, I think it's very obscure. I think it was mostly only broadcast in Europe, although the reason why I'm hesitant to say that is because it does have some American voice actors in there, including one of the first roles Cam Clark ever did.
I'm intrigued.
The series in question is a show called Dogtanian, which is, it's basically a retelling of The Three Musketeers, but every single character is an Afro dog, apart from one, who's an Afro cat.
You know, that sounds like my very first experience with Disney's Robin Hood.
Yeah, it is kind of like that, except this is the funny thing, I actually did on a whim buy a DVD with all the episodes, and although I've yet to watch all of them yet, it's surprisingly it holds up.
Okay, that is a surprise, because I know how dodgy early cartoons could be.
Yeah, like the animation, okay, that's aged quite badly, the fact that it's very stiff, but in terms of the storytelling, it's actually surprisingly good. Just sort of the way it's paced and and it goes on for it. Like, there's one episode where, okay, for those who don't know the basic story of the Three Musketeers, it's basically set in Paris, and there's one time when there are two main aspects to the country's militia. The Musketeers, who are kind of like the Royal Guards, and the Cardinal's Guards, who work underneath, well, the Cardinal. And there's like one episode where, because they're constantly feuding all the time, the Cardinal decides to talk to the King and basically says, look, it should be clear that the Cardinal's Guards should be the main military force. I mean, look at these Musketeers. They are just itching for the chance to fight. You can't have these people represent the King. And the leader of the Musketeers goes, you cowards making accusations like that! I challenge you to a duel! And the Cardinal basically goes, thank you for proving my point. So, what's actually surprising is that you've got this political game where, in order to prove their worth, the Musketeers have to not fight for an entire episode. But the Cardinal's Guards are basically doing everything they can to go them, including one actually quite tragic scene where they're beating up this very young Musketeer who obviously wants to fight back but can't draw his sword, which is, yeah, it's really interesting that they have this, like, political conflict in what is essentially a kid's show.
Oh, wow. I'd make the Game of Thrones reference, but I don't think it's apt here. Instead, I'll say, the Borgias with dogs.
Yeah, basically. It caught me so off guard that this is something I'll announce here. I've actually been considering doing, like, a retrospective on the main channel. I know it's a very obscure thing, so if I did do it, it would pretty much be, like, a personal pet project, because I don't think anyone's asking for it on this channel.
Yeah, I somehow doubt anyone has made a request for that. Still, I'd be interested.
There is one more example I can give, but it would be incredibly cheating since it came out in the 2000s and that's not within the realm of this question. All I'll say is, check out Oban Star Racers and leave it at that.
Fair enough.
With that, we can move on to the next question, and this comes from Luffy McDuck, and his question is
there a game franchise that's been dead for at least a decade you would like to see a new installment of?
You want to go first because I'm mulling it over.
Okie doke, well, I'll go for the most obvious one, which is F-Zero.
Fair enough, and I'll let you have that one because I've never played an F-Zero game.
Yeah, that's why Nintendo haven't touched it. It's basically, Miyamoto's flat out admitted it's because he can't think of anything new to do with that series, but the best way I can describe it is, I really liked the core concept of F-Zero. I like the fact that it's a fast-paced racing game. I like the fact that you can basically barge vehicles off the road or smash them against the wall or watch them explode. That appeals to the slightly more violent instincts to me, but
what's not to love?
It's also because I know technically you can get the same gameplay in Fast Racing Neo, which is on the Wii U right now, but the thing is, F-Zero does have interesting lore and a colourful cast of characters, and I just would like to see Captain Falcon in a game besides Smash Bros, you know?
Yeah, Meme City.
Yeah. I would just like him to be more in his natural environment, is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Today, we watch the falcon in its natural habitat. Carry on.
If you listen closely, you can hear his mating call. Show me your moves!
And now, we witness the falcon's aggressive behavior. In the background, Falcon Punch!
Oh, yeah, speaking of Meme City, but anyway.
Yeah, moving very quickly on before that gets any weirder.
But yeah, that's the most obvious one I can think of. I need to mull over it for a bit. Sven, can you think of anything?
Well, I can, but technically, the series isn't actually dead. It's just dead to me.
Okay, I guess I can kind of allow that. What's the series?
Might and Magic.
Oh.
Okay, so basically, after the disaster that was Might and Magic 9, the series, as I knew it, straight up died. Just straight up gave up the ghost, keeled over, and is now a floating spirit waiting to be sent to the Soul Society.
Oh.
Since then, Ubisoft and other companies have made several unfortunate attempts to bring back the series to a modern audience, and they are nothing like the Might and Magic of old.
Ah. Yeah, I can see why that would be dead to you then.
Yeah, I've probably gone over this series before, but Might and Magic was a first-person fantasy role-playing adventure game, and basically my introduction to fantasy, nerdery, coming up with weird stories in my head, etc. It's part of the reason why I'm here today. And the fact that it's been reduced to a board game in modern times is a little sad.
Yeah, that does sound kind of bad.
Yeah, and also Heroes of Might and Magic on the site has also been reduced to, it's technically the same game, but now it's just uninteresting chess with really, really bad voice acting.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, that's... yeah.
If someone could just try and emulate the spirit of the actual Might and Magic games for a change, I would be really happy.
You hear that, Kickstarter? That's something else you can bring back.
I'm actually sure it would have the fan base, because somehow the Might and Magic community is still openly active even today.
Oh, wow. There's only one other example that comes to my head. It's a strange example, and again, it's a really obscure one, but it's something I would like to see redone in modern times, just with the power of the technology, and that game is Buck Bumble.
Please do explain.
Okay, Buck Bumble, gameplay-wise, it's kind of like Lilac Wars in a 3D space, in that it's a third-person shooter that has you flying through the air and taking on vehicles. The twist was, you are a bee, a cyborg bee to be exact, and you are fighting other cyborg insects in a shrunken garden. And this could be saying a lot about me, but this is a f***ing awesome idea!
Okay, I'm interested. I will admit that.
Unfortunately, I think the reason why it's pretty much disappeared under the radar, it's basically because, admittedly, it was made by a small studio. I think it was it Argonauts? It was a small studio, and as such, it was hampered by the technology at the time, so there were some interesting garden architecture used, like there were fountains in the place, there were trenches, and the occasional flower pots. The problem was a lot of the gardens were kind of just bare fields with bits of technology and leaves scattered around them, so it didn't look that great, but the standard control scheme was interesting, and I did like the concept of the character Buck Bumble, and he had a really good design, so I would like to just see another studio have a second try with the concept, especially now with rendering technology being as good as it is. I think you could have a lot more creative set pieces with the miniaturized dogfight idea.
I can see that. Also, it would be an absolutely perfect opportunity to implement Flight of the Bumblebee in the soundtrack.
Yeah, I think most of the soundtrack was this kind of drum and bass, although it did have one of the most repetitive and yet simultaneously charming theme songs ever.
What about now? It's time to rock with the biggity buck bumble. What about now? It's time to rock with the biggity buck bumble. Bum to the bump to the bump to the bass. Bum to the bump to the bumble. Bum to the bump to the bump to the bass. Bum to the bump to the bumble.
Oh god, I gotta immediately stop listening to that. That's gonna be stuck in my head all week.
Yeah, a few seconds is all you need, my friend.
Oh god.
I apologise, you may be humming that for the next, let's say a month.
Yep, I can see it coming.
But yeah, those are the only games I can think of, so I guess we move on to the next question, which I'm about to copy you into.
Okay, our next question comes from Roy.
How does Team 4 Star's Final Fantasy VII Abridged compare to Cloud Strife's 8 so far?
Take it away, Jonin. I have still not watched either of these, shamefully.
Yeah. Well, I can say off the bat that Team 4-Star Show, Machina Abridged it's called, which is actually kind of useful because it helps me to separate them. The Machina Abridged, it has better production value, like, as much as I love Cloud Strife 8 series, or the Renegamers as they're officially known now, although their channel still is Cloud Strife 8, whatever. Point is, as much as I love them, they were kind of starting off, so their voice acting, it's a little ropey at first, but gets better over time. And they have a title sequence which is, they decide to go with the Bad on Purpose soundtrack. Like, it's basically a cheesy little rhyme that sounds like it was sung by a 5-year-old. Although, admittedly, there is something charming and catchy about just going, my name is Cloud, I have a sword, I fight like yours, because I'm bored. But yeah, I will freely admit that Machina Abridged, it has like better sound quality, better voice acting right off the bat, and it does have a much more flashy looking title sequence. That said, personally, I will freely admit this purely comes down to my personal preference, but Machina Abridged doesn't really hold up all that favourably by comparison. Okay, this is where I say it mostly comes down to the style of humor, because the style I prefer is kind of the slow delivery to the punchline is the best way I can make it. Like, part of the reason why I like sketchos is sort of where you're kind of just sort of slowly taking your time and placing all the elements there, and then you build up to the punchline, like getting a few laughs all the way, but you're kind of building up to that big moment, whereas there are some comedies which are just like, joke, punchline, joke, punchline, joke, punchline, joke, punchline, like, rapidly like that. It's why I can't get into some stuff like Lego Movie. I think is a good film, but I don't find that movie relaxing because so much is always happening at once, and I find it really difficult to take all in at once, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Yeah, so Machina Abridged, so Final Fantasy VII Abridged is more on the style I prefer, whereas Machina Abridged, it is pretty much just joke, 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 joke.
Ha, fair enough.
There's also the voices, they seem to be doing this thing where they seem to, obviously, both series being comedy series, neither character is going to be necessarily deep. With Seven Abridged, there seems to be more of a focus on actually sort of making them a character, if that makes any sense. Like, Cloud basically doesn't give a damn about anything. Barrett can't stand Cloud. Reeve is someone who really does not like his job and is just being sarcastic about everything. Whereas Machina Abridged, they seem to basically go with voice first, joke later. Okay, they both kind of making fun that Barrett's the stereotypical black man, but whilst Barrett does seem to have a character in Seven Abridged, that being someone trying to be a leader, but Cloud continuously rubs him up the wrong way. Machina Abridged, they seem to be going for this kind of over-the-top voice, and I've yet to establish what the character is. They just seem trying to go with a voice that sounds funny without actually doing anything.
You know, that's unfortunate from the makers of Hellsing Abridged.
Yeah, that's kind of the weird thing, but again, this is all could be my personal preference, and it's possible that they could be a character that develops over time, but I'm gonna give you an example of a short sequence of how each series does it just to try and demonstrate this. Okay, to avoid spoilers, we'll go with the first sequence in the reactor, where in the original, Cloud, Barret break into this factory, or Mako reactor rather. They place a bomb on it, but before this happens, Cloud gets an odd flashback from a guy named Zack who tells him, don't blow up the reactor. But Cloud decides to go ahead and set off the bomb anyway. They have 10 minutes to run out of the factory. They do so, it explodes, and the story continues. The way Makina and Bridge handles it, Cloud's about to set up the bomb, and then suddenly they get the flashback cuts in and it goes, hey, Cloud, don't blow up the reactor. I could tell you why, but bye. Cloud then says to Barret, I just had a weird vision. Is that normal? And Barret goes, you know, I'm thinking you sound crazy. Crazy enough that I'm not going to trust you with that bomb if you continue like that. And Cloud goes, okay, I'll set up with the bomb. But because he's panicked and doesn't really understand the controls, he sets it for half an hour, then accidentally sets it down to 20 minutes, then leaving it with only 5. And then there's a sudden cut to Cloud going, oh my god, and they run out the factory, picking up the rest of their teammates who seem to be taking their sweet time doing anything. Oh, and there's one battle sequence in between where they fight a guard robot, and Cloud keeps trying to attack it with his sword, and Barret keeps going, try something else, that's not working. Then Cloud uses lightning, and he goes, huh, who would have thought of that? Practically everyone.
Okay, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, that was probably one of the better ones. And that's kind of how that sequence wraps up. In Final Fantasy VII Abridged, Cloud walks out to press the bomb when he suddenly hears this strange frequency sound. He hears this odd frequency sound, and then he suddenly hears, hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Zack. Just reminding all viewers out there not to blow up any reactors, as there could be unforeseen consequences. In other news, and then it just fades out.
Wow.
Then Cloud sets up the bomb, and it says, okay, 10 minutes, that will give us plenty of time. And Barret goes, okay, let's get out of here. And like in the game normally, Barret ends up inside Cloud, and then Cloud walks at a snail's pace. Basically walks out of Barret going, Cloud, the time is going down. You might want to hurry it up a bit. And then it cuts to this montage where Cloud is still deliberately going at a snail's pace going, okay, let's see, which switch was it to get back up? Was it this one? No, maybe it was this one. And then Barret's in the background going, oh, for the love of God, please, hurry up, I'm begging you, I don't want to die,
Okay, that's pretty good.
And then the sequence ends where they manage to get out with a minute to spare, but the factory instantly blows up, and Barret goes, another minute? The timer said we had a minute left. How did we cut it so close? And then Cloud goes, I had a remote detonator on me. What, you didn't think I was going to risk my own life in there, did you?
Oh, God. That's terrible.
Yeah, and this establishes two things very quickly. One, Cloud is a git and doesn't give a f***, in his own words. Barret absolutely hates Cloud. In fact, there's a little bit later on where Cloud goes, so, yeah, can I have my money now? You've got a lot of nerve asking me that after what you just did.
To be fair, though.
So, yeah, again, it's purely personal preference, but I just prefer the way Final Fantasy VII Abridged handled all of the characters and the way they set up jokes, like the creativity of the jokes and the way it worked well with the gameplay as well, because there was the joke of walking slowly through the dungeon, but there's also there's one joke when Tifa survives a massive fall and goes, oh, better check the equipment's there. She opens the equipment menu and there's plot armor attached.
Oh, God. Okay, I really like that.
Yeah, that's kind of why I like Sven and Brit, just because the jokes are a bit more creative, the characters are a bit more engaging, and are less relying on gimmicks. I mean, yeah, they're still one note because it's jokes, but at the same time, I just prefer the way they're executed. That's the best way I can go about it, but yeah, Monkey and Brit is still enjoyable in its own right.
Well, I will keep that in mind if I ever happen to go into either of them.
And from that, we move on to our next question, which is again from Roy Havenstone.
In order for a Japanese game stroke anime to achieve mainstream popularity in the West, as opposed to niche, it must be devoid of Japanese culture. Discuss.
Ha! Okay, this is gonna be a doozy.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. To provide context, Roy Havenstone linked me to an article by Sean Maelstrom, which it's certainly an interesting topic idea, although I'm not sure if I agree with this point, because, well, let me just say, the guy uses a phrase, otaku angel of death, and I just like to read one part here, which was, he claims that one of the reasons Nintendo is failing recently, like, the reason why Wii Sports Resort wasn't as successful as Wii Sports was because they brought in Japanese culture by bringing focus on the Miis, and no, Wii Sports Resort didn't do any of that. I think it failed simply because people were tired of Wii Sports at that point.
Admittedly, yeah, Wii Sports is not exactly a representative of the Wii gaming library.
Yeah, plus also he mentions that Metroid Other M, and I quote, was entirely designed for otaku ages of death. Metroid Other M has everything they would want. It has story, it has characters, it has Japanese culture, it has manga, and yet it is not Metroid. No, Other M failed because the story was shite. That is really all there was to it.
Other M failed because Other M sucked. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but ignoring that article, just focusing on the idea that in order to achieve mainstream success, you have to remove the cultural elements of it. I can kind of see it. I mean, it's kind of obvious when you get down to it that if you try to make it for all people, it's gonna appeal to most people. Not all, because some can see through it or want more specific niches, but that's beside the point. I think, yeah, you could apply that same logic, although one also does have to wonder, why exactly is it that American culture is seen as universal? I'm not saying that as a snarky / pretentious, oh, America, they always seem to dominate everything. No, I'm asking that as a genuine question. Why is it that American culture is seen as universal? Is it because America's more of a melting pot, as they say?
I think it's because, in the end, most video game companies, most corporations, most chains, and most monopolies come from America.
Yeah, there is no getting around that when you put it.
And I can say that because of where I live.
Yeah, that is kind of true. Yeah, I think it's mainly just going as broad as possible, I guess you could say. I mean, I think even something like Dragon Ball Z that's successful, I don't think it was successful, like, because the dub, like, wiped out any references to Japanese culture. I think it was successful because it was. But let's be honest, when you compare it to other anime, like, say, Rurouni Kenshin, which is more based on Japanese culture and history, yeah, Dragon Ball Z has some odd designs and aesthetics, but ultimately it is superheroes punching each other.
Pretty much. And that is as broadly appealing to Americans as it gets.
Yeah, so I think it really just, it's not so much a case of you need to wipe all culture, it's just a case of being more broad and aware of the audiences. I mean, in fairness, this is a problem that happens a lot to Japanese games. Like, even the likes of Kojima and Keiji Inafune mentioned this is a big problem. And the fact that Japan doesn't really get the idea of the international market just yet. I mean, even people like Iwata admitted it wasn't until recently that we actually thought about what would appeal overseas in terms of Mario games. We just made whatever the hell we felt like, and that somehow succeeded. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much what it comes down to. Like, even, like I said, Inafune and Kojima, they find that the biggest problem is that all Japan can think about is what appeals to Japan. I mean, part of the reason why we didn't get half of the Tales games for ages is because they kept insisting Tales is a series that appeals only to Japan, despite the fact that there's this huge group of Western fans saying, we want to pay you money.
Yeah. And I mean, I understand where this is coming from because it was not all that long ago that dubbing companies absolutely whitewashed anything that came from overseas. I'm looking at you, 4Kids and William Masek, but but I really don't think that plays a part in video gaming.
I think it's just generally the case that the more broader the idea and concept is, the wider the appeal. I mean, you can kind of see that problem in Japanese games more than most, because like I said, there do seem to be multiple games that are appealing to a specific niche. Like, there is a game which I want to like, the Fire Emblem and Shin Megami Tensei crossover, Genbu Roko Sharp FE, so whatever the full title is of that, but the more I see footage of it, the more I just think, how the hell is this going to sell in the West? How can they sell it in the West? Because the game is entirely based around the Japanese pop idol industry, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I don't know how they're gonna work that to appeal to anyone who does not know what they're talking about.
In fact, to be honest, this might just be me, but I'm actually getting kind of annoyed of the whole idol thing in general, because yeah, we have celebrity pop stars, but not in the same creepy fascination Japan has. It's kind of one of those weird niches that's just kind of exploded in anime and made it really harder to sell to people outside. But yeah, that's another topic for another day. Point is, I think, yeah, in order for something to succeed, it has to keep in mind of the wider audiences out there. I mean, you can slip in little bits of culture. I mean, honestly, that's going to be a given either way. Like, you can argue what you want about how, oh, The Legend of Zelda is more based on Western fantasy. Little bits of Japanese culture do creep in and there, just from the bizarre nature of the characters, people like Tingle, or some of the more creepier imagery in Majora's Mask, and that's something only Japanese minds can come up with.
It's true, though.
Yeah, so that's my take on it. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Sven? Or...
No, I think you just about covered it. I mean, there's a reason that broadly appealing games sell well, and that's because, well, we don't have to be brilliantly oriented on history to know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Toon Junkie, and going into this, I'm actually a little amazed because I can actually wrap my head around it.
Does this show have continuity yet, or should I be asking more lore-specific questions?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting one. I kind of led the idea that there was sort of going to be a continuity in the very early days of VGT when I introduced Richard and the Jonin Ape, and this idea that there were additional characters running around, because that was at the height of Channel Lawson's popularity, and it was starting to influence other reviewers, including me, so I wanted to give it a try about that. But yeah, like I said in the last show, there were certain individuals who killed my enthusiasm for that idea, plus the realization that there was no space. That said, I do like the idea of callbacks and having like previous links to the shows. It's why I do occasionally read out the Toon Junkie questions aimed at Richard and the like, because yeah, I will admit, I do know why people don't like sketch characters, but Richard is fun to perform, I'm sorry.
And fun to watch.
Yeah. Basically, the long and short answer to this question is, I do like the idea of having a continuity, but it's a little bit loose, if that's the best way to describe it. It's not going to be a full-on storyline a la Atop the Fourth Wall, but I am going to make references to past things that have happened in that.
Yeah, which I think is a fair enough approach.
And with that, we go to our sixth and final question for the night, and, well, we always like to end a little bit of craziness, but this month it comes from an unlikely source. The final question from Infernity Zero is...
Suddenly you find yourself assaulted by Fire Emblem's Black Knight. What do you do?
Well, just recently I played an entry into a Scion campaign where we were faced with 3 demigods and the Roman god of fire, and I think I'm going to paraphrase my character's joke reaction from that. Takeo shits himself and dies.
Yeah, that would probably be the more realistic reaction. The only other reaction I can think of is whip out a proton pack and hope we're running on the Japanese continuity.
In other words, you know who to call.
Yeah, that's the only other reaction I can think of. Otherwise, the more realistic reaction would probably be something along the lines of run, 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 don't stop running, run.
Hop on a plane and go.
Hop onto a Segway if it would go faster, but anyway.
I've just been blessed with the stupidest mental image I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
Running from the Black Knight on a Segway.
And on that bizarre note, that ends this month's Q&A. As always, keep the questions coming. We get some very interesting discussions out of them. And with that, we move on to our next segment, which is...
Reviews!
This is the section where we go in depth about something we read, watched, or played last month. So, Sven, do you have anything to review this month?
For a change of pace, I actually do. So, despite the fact that I kind of credit myself as a sci-fi buff, I somehow managed to wait an entire year before viewing the subject of today's review, Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh, this will be interesting, because I've heard so many great things about it, but I've not had the chance to check it out yet.
So, basically, most of the good things you've heard are true. I mean, at its core, we're still talking about a film franchise that is basically just dumb post-apocalyptic action, where everyone looks like they melted armor out of plastic and otherwise raided sporting goods stores. But I'll still cut straight to the point of this entire review and say that I absolutely loved the film, because, well, it's Mad Max, it's kind of self-aware in a silly way, and also, man, the cast! And on that note, just to take a quick side stream here, why is it that 90% of all of Tom Hardy's modern film roles have him speaking in barely intelligible grumbles?
Because they're trying to make him sound badass?
I mean, you had the bad voice filter in The Dark Knight Rises, and in this, he just sounds like he gargled gravel. Either that or he sounds a lifelong death metal singer.
Right now, all I can think of is that advice from Crispin Freeman: typecasting isn't your enemy, it's your friend.
Well, to be fair, it works out well for Tom Hardy here. Even though despite being the title character, he is not actually the main character.
Fair enough. So, what's the premise? I mean, I know Mad Max is post-apocalyptic action, but that's really about all I do know of it. So.
Well, as far as I could tell, there is basically not a continuity. So each film is basically just an encapsulated story in Max Rockatansky's adventures through post-apocalyptic Australia. What a phrase! Mad Max Fury Road specifically focuses on Max's efforts helping a former bandit enforcer simultaneously get revenge on her tyrannical boss, and also free 5 of his concubines from, let's be honest, sex slavery.
Oh, wow.
It goes heavy. And yet it still shows more restraint than Game of Thrones.
Well, that's not hard, in fairness.
No, restraint is to Game of Thrones what sanity is to Kojima. So yeah, basically that's the plot. Free the slaves on a tanker truck.
Wow, that brings up so many questions, I don't know where to start. Awesome questions, don't get me wrong, but...
Yeah, preface this for people who haven't countered Mad Max much so far. This franchise loves vehicular warfare. And this is no different, as the main characters basically tear through the Australian outback in a war rig.
Well, I can think of worse ways to travel.
I mean, it's post-apocalypse.
Indeed. So, you mentioned the cast. What is the strongest element about them? Is it the acting? Is it the arcs they go through? Or...
Well, I think it's really a combination of all of the above, because you've got one former bandit enforcer who is basically in this purely for her own revenge, and yet still somehow comes across as more human and likable than Sasuke Uchiha. You've got another ex-bandit who goes through essentially a miniature redemption arc, and that's really good. All of the acting is good, and I can't emphasize this enough, I love the character design. The antagonists look suitably horrific, given it's the post-apocalypse and they're the antagonists. And Tom Hardy is more than a worthy successor to the insanity that was Mel Gibson.
Oh yeah, that could be a tough actor for.
Yeah, I mean, because Mel Gibson is insanity incarnate, so...
Especially these days, but anyway.
It's only become worse with age. But, yeah, point is, the cast looks great, the acting is awesome, I love the character design, and yeah, the character arcs, simple as they are, given it's Mad Max, it's stupid action, are all really good.
Wow. Okay, I'm looking forward to that then. By the way, when you say the Bandit Enforcer, is that Furiosa?
Yes. The resident uber badass, who is so awesome, even Fallout 4 references her.
I was going to say, because of one of the things I kept hearing is how great the writing of the female characters was, specifically Furiosa.
Yeah. Basically, a character so badass, she worked up to the rank of Enforcer in the main antagonist's dictatorial sexist society, through pure unadulterated willpower and kick-assery.
Oh wow, yeah, okay.
For the record, if you want an idea of this film's non-stop nature, the film practically opens with an unarmed duel between Max Rockatansky and Imperator Furiosa.
Okay, that sounds like an explosive opening. Wait, oh god, I just realized I made a bad pun.
Actually, you did. I'm proud.
I'm crying on the inside, but anyway.
So, yeah, I think the long and short of it is, Mad Max as his franchise basically inspired all of Fallout, and predictably, I loved every minute of my first entry in the series.
Yeah, I've been meaning to check it out, but that's kind of sealed the deal, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I would highly recommend it to basically anyone who loves high-octane sci-fi shoot-'em-up action. And weirdly enough, going back to Restraint, this film is not all that brutal.
Huh.
You don't really get ridiculously over-the-top deaths, except one, that's the main antagonist, I won't spoil it, but that's basically the zenith of horrifying deaths in the movie, so if that's a concern, you really won't have to worry about it, except for one really brief shot of a really bad death.
Wow, that's actually kind of interesting in that sense, because I haven't actually seen any of Mad Max, so this is just an outsider's take of it, but I always assumed that series was just basically cheesy over-the-top action, so it's kind of interesting that they have that restraint and character focus in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, for a franchise that pretty well defined over-the-top, post-apocalyptic brutality, I mean, Fallout based itself on it. It does have a great deal of restraint and kind of self-awareness, and yeah, if you're into storytelling and character arcs like I am, you'll like it.
Okay, by the way, when you say self-awareness, is it just that they're a bit more restrained, or do they openly poke fun at the idea?
Well, I'll put it like this. Even though Mad Max Fury Road tells a serious story, it occasionally really does not take itself seriously. Like,
oh, okay.
Like, the main antagonist's mooks are kind of hilarious at points.
Yes, I do know how much you love your Mewtwo.
We're talking basically the equivalent of combining the Raiders from the Fallout series and the Psychos from the Borderlands series and giving them snappy one-liners.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like one guy riding a spiked car into battle screaming, "What a beautiful day!"
Ah, yes, that's the one I've seen from the trailer.
And I'm not kidding, by the way, there are spiked cars in this.
Oh, dear. Yeah, like I said, the more I keep hearing about this, the more it seals the deal, because to be honest, hearing you describe this stuff, half of my mind is going, what the hell did I just hear? The other half of me is going, I'm curious about this now.
Yeah, and just to seal the deal for you as far as silly self-awareness goes, one of the one-off extras on the main antagonist's war rig is a guy playing a flame-throwing metal guitar.
Wow. Okay. I now need to compare my mental image with what's on screen.
I'll just sum that concept up by saying that it was one of the only times Cinema Sins ever took off a sin without comment.
Yeah, consider me sold now.
Yeah, so, long and short of it, that's my recommendation. Mad Max Fury Road. It's insane, but the storytelling is awesome.
Okay, awesome. I'll definitely look into it then. For my review this month, I'm going to take something a bit obscure. It's going to be a web series, but not in the sense of Ruby or anything like that. It's not a big animation. Rather, it is a radio drama.
Huh. My interest is piqued.
It's a series run by Alex Shaw, who's run well, it used to be called the Digital Drift podcast, but it's now known as the School of Movies podcast. They've done a lot of in-depth work of analysing mainly movies, but also the occasional game and TV series. But he also writes novels. Specifically, he's been writing the non-running series New Century. Now, I've mentioned New Century before in some quickfire review stuff, but here's the thing. I'm actually only going to be focusing not on New Century as a whole, but rather one arc. Because, okay, New Century has basically a series of novels which act as arcs to the main story. The first one, Cartographer's Handbook, it basically sets down all of the ground lore, I guess you could say. Like, it establishes the main premise, and the idea is that a new creature known as a Wendigo appears in America after the Civil War, and basically causes so much chaos in a manner similar to a zombie apocalypse that the infrastructure of America is completely and utterly destroyed, so they have to try and reunify them. And one of the ways they do that is through an organization known as the Cartographers, which is basically scouts trying to get as much information they can about what's going on and put it together into a big book known as the Cartographer's Handbook. So that's the first arc, where it's like a little collection of short stories that establishes the main lore and key parts in this new alternate history. Then there's Secret Rooms, which is when the series kind of moves more into audio drama and where it gets more like a traditional story. But it's still following on the continuity of that lore, and it continues on into the stories of Arlington, and later on it will continue into Steamheart, although that one hasn't been released yet. However, the arc/novel I'm going to talk about is one that actually acts as a standalone that is basically entirely separate from that. It gets some vague references later on towards the end and in the backstory of one character, but otherwise is a story you can take standalone. In fact, it's so standalone that it actually threw a couple of people aback at first when they first read it, because in the story Secret Rooms, the characters meet a professor who introduces the idea that there are in fact multiple timelines. Like, he guesses that there is a timeline when the Wendigo never appeared, but he believes there are several different Earths with several different main changes. And then suddenly we switch to this new arc, Tiger's Eye, in a manner which can best be summarized as a now for something completely different.
I had almost forgotten about that meme.
Yeah, it switches to a completely different world, but like I said, it works as its own standalone piece, and it's actually my favorite one so far, mainly because whilst New Century is mostly sci-fi, this one is a little bit more on the fantastical side, which kind of appeals to my preferences just a little bit more. This radio play, like I said, is known as Tiger's Eye. It's called so because in this version of Earth, it's dominated by anthropomorphic cats.
Somehow, I'm not surprised you got into such a series.
Yes, I wonder why. But anyway, getting to the story itself, it follows a tiger woman named Haral who lives with the Durga tribe, who I can best describe as a fantastical take on Native American culture. Haral, due to some previous difficulties I won't spoil, has basically been isolating herself from everyone and focusing purely on her duties as a hunter. While she's doing all this, she suddenly comes across a human boy named Miguel. And for some reason, even though every part of her mind is telling her, this is a bad idea, this is a bad idea, he should just be left here to die, fend for himself, she can't bring herself to abandon him. Like, on instinct, she grabs him out of a river and then decides to feed him for a bit, and then eventually it just gets to the point where she goes, okay, you know what, I'll just take him back to the village, maybe we can figure something out. However, this plan doesn't go smoothly, as the village's shaman Haka thinks he looks like a demon depicted in an ancient story, and, well, his first response is basically, kill it! Kill it! Kill it!
Burn the heathen! Burn the witch! Burn the heathen! Burn the witch!
Basically, yeah, so Hral decides to take the next course of action, which is sneak out of the village at night with Miguel on her back to try and find a way to return Miguel to his home, with the shaman Haka following close behind her. It's kind of this standard fantastical adventure as she goes through the different parts of the jungle, meeting different tribes, and trying to find out anything she can about, well, where Miguel came from. And it's a series that you can probably tell from that summary has a lot of thought put into it. Like, there is a lot of thought about the way this culture works, how the tribes are being spread out, what the main culture and customs are. And the characters are very engaging, mainly because they have little complexities that make them stand out. The protagonist, Hral, is a caring and maternal figure, but has layers of emotional intensity that make her a fearsome warrior and give her many badass moments in the series. Miguel appears innocent and childlike, but we see more of his intelligence as the story goes on. Even the antagonist, Haka, who I kind of sold short in that introduction, is less of a two-dimensional strawman and more like a right-wing politician. He has this idea that we have to protect ourselves first and foremost. We should not converse with foreign tribes. We should not let in these elements we don't know how to control. Like, he's so stuck in his old way of thinking, he cannot think outside of that. So his mind is always, why can you not understand? This has worked so well in the past. It's what our ancestors say. We should have been sticking to this. If that's the best way I can describe.
Ha! I'm reminded of the foreign policy platforms of a lot of presidential campaigns.
Yeah. Kind of uninteresting in that sense, but there's also some very unique elements to it, particularly one which I don't see explored very often in fiction. And for the most part, I get why. It's mostly a sense of convenience, but basically, Hral meets Miguel, and Miguel is obviously an intelligent child. There's just one problem. Neither of them can understand each other. So a good first chunk of the series is Hral and Miguel trying to think of a way to communicate what's going on to each other. Like, one of my favorite episodes actually has them and another character trying to develop a form of sign language in order to try and communicate just what exactly is going on. And this is when the plot actually gets a progression, because it's when they finally develop this sign language that Miguel can actually start explaining where exactly he came from in the first place.
Ha! Translation gap bridged with sign language. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, eventually they do start, like, learning some words of their language and exchanging it, but I don't know why. It's one of those fascinating points that never gets addressed in fiction, and again, I do understand why. It would be kind of slow if every single Star Trek episode, for example, Picard had to consult a Klingon dictionary just to see where...
I like that.
And there were other interesting elements too, like, the culture itself is really detailed, especially when you get into different parts, and I really, really wish I could get into spoilers here, because there is one concept that shows up towards the second half, which basically took my opinion from the series from, this is fairly standard but kind of interesting, to, oh my god, I never saw that coming.
Wow. And what's impressive is that almost never happens with modern fiction.
It's an angle I never thought you would explore. Like I said, it's difficult to describe about spoilers, but it really is interesting in that sense, and it also leads into kind of a miniature tangent of mine, which is, this was part of the reason why I started to transition away from Game of Thrones, because Tiger's Eye was airing around the same time of Game of Thrones Season 9. By which I mean Series 5, curse you Tunslip. And part of the reason why I stuck around in Game of Thrones for as long as I did was because it does have these interesting character conflicts, and I really don't know where else I can find it. This show right here has that same interesting character conflicts, and is willing to go and hit those dark areas. Like, they encounter a tribe that uses some really, really cruel methods to keep prisoners in line, let's put it that way, but it's handled tastefully. Like, when dark stuff does happen, it's not with the sadistic glee the later stuff from Game of Thrones has. It's more focusing on what the victim feels and how they're going to, I guess you could say, rise above it. Maybe that's the wrong term, but you know what I mean. It's a transition into character development as opposed to, we want to shock people for ratings.
That is music to my ears.
Yeah, that's kind of when, okay, you can get this kind of intention writing. I don't have to rely on that show.
Yeah, it which shall not be named.
The technical production is also really good as well. Like, the way the sound and editing is used, especially in some of the more action sequences, which you're pretty much relying on music and narration because, well, it's an audio drama, but
Yeah, I mean, what else can you expect?
It's still really engaging despite that because of the intense music and just like the perfect delivery of Maureen Foley as Hral, who often has to carry entire scenes where she's explaining her thought process during intense fight sequences. And one thing that definitely appeals to me is that there's a slight martial arts inspiration from this.
I knew there was some reason.
I don't know how else to say it. It's a good series with compelling concepts and a strong emotional core. From start to finish, you really do want Hral and Miguel to succeed. And the further you go on, the more attached you grow to these characters, and the greater their bond goes, the more, I'll be honest, during the later episodes, all I could think of was, please don't let this end in tragedy, please don't let this end in tragedy, I like these characters so much now.
You know it's a good series when you're thinking that. I've been in that situation plenty.
Indeed. So, yeah, that's the long and short of it. Tiger's Eye, check it out. It's on iTunes, and I believe the novel version is on the Kindle store. And, yeah, that's really all I can say about it. It's a good series, give it a listen.
As a fan of audiobooks, I think I might just do that.
And with that, we go into our final section, which is
Quickfire Reviews!
But yeah, this is the section where we review everything else we've read, watched, or played this month, but within the maximum time limit of 60 seconds. Sven, anything for this section?
Well, it's funny that you reviewed an audiobook, because I think now is just about the time for me to do the same thing.
Drunken Fireworks by Stephen King, a complete departure from Stephen King's usual fare. Drunken Fireworks is a comedy. Straight up, a comedy. Kind of a dark comedy because it ends up with two drunken families accidentally burning their houses down, but hey, for a Stephen King work, nobody dies, and I consider that a start. Basically, this audiobook, which for the record is pretty much only available in audiobook form, is hilarious, and I loved it.
Awesome, I'll have to check that out.
I will warn, though, it contains a ridiculous amount of silly Northeastern American accents. But as a fan of accents, I'm okay with that.
I will keep that in mind. And in my case, I've got two movies to quickly review.
Spectre, the newest James Bond film starring Daniel Craig. It still has Sam Mendes as the director, so the cinematography looks pretty nice, but otherwise, it's more like a traditional Bond film rather than the standard set by Casino Royale and Skyfall, so yeah, it may not appeal to everyone. I enjoyed it as a guilty pleasure. The best way I can describe is that it's the movie equivalent of junk food. You know it's bad for you, but it's still enjoyable nevertheless. Although, that said, that twist of Blofeld, that really wasn't the best of ideas, guys.
I guess I'm gonna have to leave that to the imagination because spoilers.
Pretty much, yes, although I can fill you in if you really want to later. And finally,
Ip Man, a sort of biographical film starring Donnie Yen, which follows the story of Ip Man. It is an interesting film with good cinematography and fights, but it has a really weird way of transitioning from one section to another. To give you an idea, it starts off with warring dojos fighting off an outsider who wants to challenge them, and then suddenly the Japanese invade. I'm not kidding. That's how it transitions. We just suddenly cut to a subtitle saying Japan invades, and then everything is miserable. Good movie otherwise, though.
You know, that sounds like a summary of World War II.
Yeah, it was a bit weird. And I suppose there is one thing I can do to close it off.
Doctor Who Series 9. I've already covered the individual episodes on Twitter, but here's my overall thoughts. There were some good episodes. I especially enjoyed Under the Lake and Before the Flood, but that said, Moffat really needs to learn some new writing tricks and maybe plan some arcs a little bit better because, well, let me put it this way. When your writing style reminds me of when me and Sven used to do improvised text role plays, you probably should consider getting a script editor or something.
That's a good way of putting it. Very diplomatic, too.
Yeah. Oh, and also, on a side note, no. A hybrid cannot be two people. It completely defeats the purpose of a hybrid. That's not a twist, that's just being silly.
That could be a summary of Moffat's entire run.
And that brings our podcast to an end for this month, so, as always, if you have any opinions on what we discussed, leave it in the comment section. That's what it's there for. Until then, I've been the Jonin Monkey.
And I've been Sven the Crusader. Merry belated Christmas, happy Hanukkah, etc. everyone, by the way, because we didn't have an episode last month.
That was Monkey Broadcast, a monthly review and discussion show hosted by the Jonin Monkey and Sven the Crusader. If you feel you've been the subject of slander or that your copyright was misused, send an email to thejoninmonkey@yahoo.co.uk. For more news and media reviews, follow me on Twitter @thejoninmonkey and go to thejoninmonkey.podbean.com for previous podcasts and MP3 downloads. All music used belongs to the original owners. Until next month, have fun, kids!